Alright guys, so welcome to my fantasy football guide, and before we begin, let's talk about the league rules that I've been used to for the past 4 years, okay? So every other league rule, I'm sorry, you guys are gonna have to check those first before you guys watch this video, or at least, maybe you guys will get some insight on this. So, first off, I usually play head-to-head, which means every week I have to go against one other player and their team. So redraft is basically where every single year you have to draft your players again. It's not like Dynasty, where in Dynasty you kind of get to keep your players. Everybody gets to keep their players, and it really affects value and a lot of strategies. And so that's why some players are really good in redraft leagues, and some players are really, really bad in Dynasty. So that's something to keep in mind if you guys are playing in the Dynasty format, so take a look at that. Full PPR is also another thing. It really varies. Some people play half PPR, some people play no PPR, and that mostly affects wide receivers and running backs. And so in full PPR formats, every single reception, you basically get 1 point. And that is pretty big, because that can save a couple people and save their weeks, basically. And I'll get to that later. And another thing that I am used to too is a one flex format. So some people actually have no flexes. I don't know why. And some leagues also have 2 flexes, which makes more sense, to be honest. And I'd love to play in those kinds of leagues. But for the past 4 years, I've mostly been playing one flex. And how that affects the league and their waiver wires, I have no idea, to be honest. I don't know if that affects the bench spots either. Things I won't talk about. Drafting players. So I'll be honest, guys, when I drafted my players, I've drafted 3 of them and I auto drafted 2 of them because I completely forgot what time it is and what days I was drafting when I signed up for these leagues. And it turns out I've just been equally good as a manager in both the teams that I actually drafted and not drafted. So that's pretty good. It's a lot of luck, guys. It's a lot of luck, I'll be real. And the next one is other types of leagues. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm only used to my format. Alright, so let's move on. Let's talk about our standard lineup. So I actually got this from my actual fantasy team, okay? So you got 1 QB, 2 wide receivers, 2 RBs, and a tight end. And next, we also have the defense slot, the flex spots, and you also got a kicker. So as far as I know, a lot of people don't actually play with defenses. I don't know too much about kickers. There are some leagues that just straight up have no defenses, and this won't really apply to you. In fact, defenses are kind of hard to tell, like, if they're gonna be good per week. And honestly, I just go with the flow. Now, like, for example, I have AJ Brown. And then I have the San Francisco 49ers defense, and they're going against each other this week. It's more of a personal preference. I really want to root for one team. I don't want it to be overcomplicated and be like, oh, you know what? AJ Brown scored. That's fine. 49ers are still up 11 points. That's okay. I'm not a fan of that, to be honest. It's not fun to watch. And flex spots. So flex spots are usually a spot that you want to reserve, maybe like a player that has a later schedule. So Monday Night Football, that's huge. Like, you usually save your spot for that player. But usually flex spots are saved for tight ends, running backs, and wide receivers. And for the kicker, I have J-Tuck. J-Tuck used to be the GOAT, and I don't want to say he's washed. In fact, he's actually made it back. Again, I'm a Ravens fan, so I put J-Tuck over there. GOAT kicker, why not? Another couple things that I want to talk about first are the lingo. There's a lot of jargons when we talk about fantasy football. When you go on to watch YouTube videos, there's a lot of jargons. And to be honest, I want to break them all down for you, but there's just too much. But I just want you guys to kind of understand the basics. Okay, so first off, floor and ceiling. What are you talking about by low floor, low ceiling, high ceiling? So it's all about expectations, right? Because in fantasy football, we can only know so much. So floor and ceiling basically refers to the expectations of how many points a player can get. So floor is basically the minimum points we expect the player to get, and the ceiling is the maximum. Like, if it's a low floor and the high ceiling, we're thinking, maybe we're thinking like Xavier Worthy, for example. So his low floor, usually we can expect 2-3 points out of him, right? We know he can do that. But we also know that because he has a high ceiling, we also know that he's capable of getting 20 points. We can't really expect and know everything until it all plays out. Next, we have bye weeks. Bye weeks are kind of a big deal too. So bye weeks are the weeks where players in a certain team don't play because it's their time to take a break. Like in the beginning of the season, we don't think about it too much. But when you're in the mid-season, you start to think, I need to get more wins. So ideally, we would have to trade for players that already have their bye weeks done. But the reason why bye weeks are also kind of important is because sometimes you have a team full of players with bye weeks, which means your whole team just doesn't show up in week 6, for example. Then if that's the case, who are you starting in week 6? Are you going to throw? Or are you going to try and look for a player to substitute? And I'll get to that later. Sleepers. You might see the word sleeper a lot in chat. You might see a lot of sleepers in Instagram posts, stuff like that. But what they're trying to basically tell you is that this player is being really underestimated this week. Like this week, we believe that this person is going to have a really, really good game. And we should definitely start these players, even though like based on the history of this player, nobody wants to start this player, and there's just no good reason to start this player. But if you think about it really deeply, and you really think about it, hey, I think this player might actually have a shot at getting a good week this week. So that's what a sleeper would be. Basically an underestimated player, and it's someone to consider into your flex spot. Touches is basic. It's pretty simple. It's like how often does this person touch the ball, right? And so in general, when I talk about players, I say high touches is good because it means this person gets to play more, and the more this person plays, the more likely this person is going to generate us points and have good production. And it's just better production, more touches, more wins, basically. So matchups would be like, of course, like Team A versus Team B. But the reason why we use matchups a lot in fantasy football is because we'll get to that in a bit, where we talk about the types of players. And it's just that some types of players really rely on good matchups, while some players you just start regardless, right? And that's why we use the word matchups a lot, because week by week, we start to look at the matchups and we start to think, oh, this, for example, running back is historically really bad against bad matchups, but good in good matchups. And then there are other players that are kind of just like, you start him regardless, and you know he's going to give you at minimum 10 points. That's where the floor and ceiling thing is, right? So that's why we use the word matchups a lot. RB1 versus RB1 overall can also be a little bit confusing. So when we say RB1 and RB2, RB3, we're talking about your team, okay? So it's all about context here. So RB1 in your team is basically your number one running back overall in your team. RB1 overall is basically, this is the running back, the best running back that you can possibly have in your team. It's really all about context. For example, I'm going to talk about the committee in a bit. So RB1, RB2, RB3. Those are the three running backs in, for example, maybe the Ravens roster. If I say overall, I'm talking about Saquon Barkley. I'm talking about Denrick Henry. I'm talking about Kyron Williams, for example. Sort of like a tier list in a way. I did already talk about the flex spot, but just to elaborate a little bit more about why this is kind of important. It is the most versatile role you have in your team. In different circumstances, the flex spots are really, really important and something to really think about, because that could be a wide receiver 3, it could be a running back 3 or a tight end 2 when it's not possible in your format. So that's why the flex spot is really versatile, and it's really important to think about every week. Who do you put over there? And the last part of the lingo that I want to talk about is the IR, injured reserve. So the IR, again, if your player gets down with an injury, like you literally see it in your screen, or maybe even during practice, maybe there's like a hamstring injury that happened during practice, and then now they can't play this Sunday. Let's say, for example, your bench can fit 5 players. You can put that person in your IR, and then you'll have one extra space on your bench, which is really important because if you're, especially when you're starting out, you really don't know these things. In my experience, you usually only have 2 IR spots. So if you have 3, or God help me, 4 injured people in your team, if that does happen to you, then you might have to consider dropping them. But of course, if all 4 of them have value, they might not have value now, but later on they will have value. Probably. If the experts say that they'll come back in week 10, week 12, you could look for a trade. And if you really need to get somebody that can give you the production you need right now to survive and make the playoffs, then yeah, then you're not really messed up. So use your IR slots and use them carefully. There are 8 types of players, and again, while I was brainstorming for this video, just 8 types of players came in mind, and if I'm missing anything, please let me know. Again, this video is really supposed to be informative, and I'm not a pro, as I said, and so you guys, please help me out in the comments. It'll help me, it'll help other people too. Workhorse players and mediocre offenses, this is really why I'm making this video, because you kind of want to understand why these players are valuable. And Chuba Hubbard is one of the best waiver wire pickups I had all year. These players usually score. Like everybody else in these offenses are really bad. Like let's say Bryce Young starts and Deontay Johnson is really good. I'm not gonna like doubt him on that, but it's just you can't really trust Bryce Young. And so that's why for the passing game it kind of sucks, but Chuba Hubbard in this run game is really good. Even though they have a really bad offensive line, Chuba Hubbard takes up 100% of the workload, you know? And that's a big reason why you want Chuba Hubbard. Even though he's in a really bad team and the Carolina Panthers are really bad, you want to get Chuba Hubbard. But however, I will get into handcuffs later on. And also, yeah, CMC used to be one of these, you know, like the Panthers just isn't good and his talent's being wasted. And when he moved to the 49ers, he's literally number 1. Now, the next type of player that I want to talk about are committee players and high-powered offenses. So these players, there's usually an RB1 and an RB2. And in most cases, you really want to get the RB1 because they're the ones that get the most touches. They're the ones that get the most light in the team. You know, like people will give him the ball, and you will see him on the field a lot. But in a committee, it's kind of tough because you usually have an RB2, sometimes an RB3, and these players usually you don't want them. Chuba Hubbard might have to split his workload, and so the production just isn't there for him to start, and because he's in a mediocre offense, you just don't want to start him. However, that doesn't apply for high-powered offenses, because the Detroit Lions are really good, and Gibbs and Montgomery are both equally talented, and so they're both going to give you the production you need in fantasy, and they're both, you know, they're just both really talented. So even though both players have to split the workload and split the touches, they're going to give you incredible results. Now let's talk about talented players and crowded depth charts. So I got both the Ravens and the 49ers here, but I think the 49ers probably is a better example of this, because you guys have really talented wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, an RB1, and a tight end 1. These players are like, you know, like at least last year, top 10 in their categories, you know, like CMC was like RB1, Kittle was a top 5, maybe probably top 5 tight end last year, I think, and Deebo Samuel and Ayuk, they were both really good players, and it's just not enough work for everybody. Everybody has to split the touchdowns. Not everybody gets to shine because they're all really talented, but they just don't see the ball, and that's why, you know, these are the other types of players that you want to take a look at. And also Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews. So this is not really a great example because Mark Andrews recently has been popping off. Derrick Henry is just not stopping. But I just threw them in there because, you know, we have Isaiah Likely, we have Zay Flowers, we have Mark Andrews, and we have Derrick Henry, and we also got Lamar Jackson, the dual threat QB who sometimes steals touchdowns. And so yeah, again, these are all really talented players, but just not everyone's going to see the ball. So if you're going to play fantasy football week by week, you kind of you're going to hesitate a little bit. And so sometimes I would recommend that you put these players in the flex spot, because unless they show consistency, you don't feel confident starting them every week, except for Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is a must start, obviously. Debo has had, his lows, but, whatever. I think it's going to get better with Juan Jennings out and everybody. Anyway, PPR gods. This is a fantastic addition to this list because Bijan Robinson, he has 5 targets, 4 targets, 3 targets, and you really want to see players that have high targets, because more likely than not they're going to receive it, and then they're going to get a point from that. And as I said earlier, they're going to save you weeks. So sometimes these players, they're really bad at rushing, and sometimes they're really bad at getting the ball moving, and sometimes that is really costly both in real life and in their actual teams and your fantasy football team, because less touchdowns is bad for everyone, okay? And I like my balls in the air because this is a running back. You're supposed to pass him the ball, not throw him the ball. But because they're chucking him the ball and he's catching it, that's just, it's a little joke. But yeah, you want players that have high target shares. Alright, so I'm not going to get too deep into this, but high upside deep threats, these are the players that have explosive capabilities. Like these are the guys that, they're one incredible play away from being like deadly, and then the next week that incredible play, it's just not there next week, and then he's gonna like throw you the whole week. Xavier Worthy is one huge example. I can't really think of great examples of these, to be honest, because I don't really know. Xavier Worthy, he's really fast. He's a really fast wide receiver, and he can run, but sometimes he just trips, and then you just get, oh my god, I can't believe you tripped. That was easy touchdown, touchdown dependent players, again, I have no big example for this, but basically, again, it's kind of self-explanatory. These are the players that, unless they get a touchdown, they're just gonna give you really bad numbers. And Javonte Williams, the reason why I threw him in there is because I picked him up off the waivers. I'm gonna be transparent, and just this week he got 2 rushing touchdowns, and that gave him 24 points. That's just insane stuff. Whenever he doesn't get a touchdown, he just gets you less than 10 points. And so yeah, so you would consider these guys as touchdown dependent players. Another experience that I want to share was last year in the playoffs, in the 4th quarter, he only had 4 points, okay? And then in the very almost last play with a couple minutes left, I think JSN got a touchdown. And I freaked out because I needed that touchdown so bad, because that was a make or break for me. He was literally my last player, and it sucks, as a fantasy football player manager, you don't want it all to go down to one player, which is why you gotta manage all your players. And so if your player is touchdown dependent, yeah, I try to stay away from that. I want to keep that consistency, that high floor, and that I don't like high ceilings. High ceilings are great, but they're not something that I really chase as a manager. I forgot to mention this, guys, but the high upside players and the touchdown dependent players, you would consider them boom or bust. Now, this is a term that we use in fantasy football where they either have a really good week or a really bad week, which brings us to the 7th type of player, which is floor players. So a floor player would basically be a player that consistently gets you 10 points. They always have the production, but they just can never seem to get higher than what they normally get. They're pretty predictable, pretty safe. You don't really expect too much out of them, but at the same time, you do know what you're getting when you start them. So these players, I usually start them when we have a bye week, for example. So if a player is not available in a certain week, at least I have a floor player in my bench that can start for that player. So that's where floor players really come into play, while boomer busts are really like the players that you're feeling a little risky, you know? You're feeling, ooh, that's pretty good. And if you have, I don't want to say dumb, but like if you guys have like not so knowledgeable managers in your league, and one of your players just so happened to boom a little, you know, like skyrocketed, like for example, I'm not saying Jamar Chase is a boomer bust. He's consistently good. But let's just say, for example, like a player had a Jamar Chase week where this player got 40 points. Oh my god. 40 points. That must make the next week at minimum 16 points, right? I don't know. It's just some kind of like mindset some people might have. They're like, if this person is capable of doing that, imagine what he can do for the rest of the year. So if you have managers like that, we have a thing we call sell high, and we're gonna get to that later on, but we're not gonna get too much into that. I don't want to give too much, you know, fantasy advice or anything, but yeah, that's those are usually what boomer busts do, and sometimes you do keep them in your bench for those types of managers, while floor players are the people that they're really not that exciting to have, which is why I don't have too many. And lastly, handcuffs. I did say that I was gonna get to this. So what we have here on the left is Kyren Williams, and on the right we have Blake Corum. And shamefully, I drafted a lot of Blake Corum because I thought, oh, Kyren Williams, he's going to get hurt, okay, and if he gets hurt, Blake Corum gets the starting role. Okay, so Kyren actually takes up 100% of the backfield. Okay, he gets every single touch. I think. I think there's also another running back. I'm not a Kyren Williams owner. I'm sorry, but he's a top 3 running back in fantasy right now, Kyren Williams, and there's just like no sign of him stopping. So that's why everybody that drafted Blake Corum, they just drop him. But what I'm trying to get to here is handcuffs are basically just backups who are going to take the starting role if the starting player is out, okay? And another example of that would be Braylon Allen. Yeah, if Brees goes down, Braylon Allen will get the starting role. So, all right, let's go to the quarterback. So, everybody that we've talked about earlier were all applicable to tight ends, running backs, and wide receivers. Well, what about the quarterback? You know, hey, Kevin, should I draft Patrick Mahomes first overall next year? Hell no. I own Patrick Mahomes this year, and I can tell you right now, not worth it. Okay, he's really, really bad, but that's besides the point. What about the quarterback position? In fact, right now we've okay, I'm gonna tell you, this is just basically my observation of fantasy football this year, which is that we're getting a lot of great quarterbacks. Okay, we got Kirk Cousins. Sometimes he's in the waiver wire. I don't know why, but Kirk Cousins is really startable. Geno Smith, you know, and then we got Caleb Williams and Justin Fields. Okay, Justin Fields, he lost his position to Russell Wilson. But, okay, why are we starting these quarterbacks from mediocre to bad teams? Except Bryce Young. I'm not talking about Bryce Young here, but there are a couple quarterbacks in pretty mediocre teams. Why are we starting them? Sorry for calling the Bears mediocre, by the way. The Bears are doing pretty good, but we want to start them because they have rushing upside. So Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson, they're both fantastic quarterbacks in fantasy football because they rush, you know, like it's part of their game plan, you know, they're dual threats. Josh Allen's also a huge one because the defense are kind of like, is he going to throw it or is he going to run it himself? That's why it's kind of like, it's both really tough to deal with in real life, but it's also really good in fantasy football because sometimes they even get the rushing touchdown, and so they're getting the points that a running back would get as a quarterback, right? And so Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels must starts every week. Sorry, Jaden Daniels, you got hurt, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so what do you actually do in fantasy football? Let's talk about this. So, other than crying and cheering for your teams, fantasy football is really supposed to add to your watch experience, okay? You're supposed to watch football and also cheer for certain players, because that is just more engaging that way. In fact, you can bet, and so like watching fantasy football really engages you, and so it makes you want to watch the games every single week. And yeah, so when you're watching these games every week, what do you look out for? Well, actually, one of the biggest things that's happening this year, and is pretty, it's happening pretty often, is injuries. All right, injuries mean a lot of stuff in fantasy football. So we got Mike Evans. Again, I don't want to talk about this really bad game. I'm a Ravens fan, and I admit that this game was brutal and really sucks because I'm a big Baker Mayfield fan, even though he was in the Browns. I love him. Mike Evans went down. He's going to be back in week 12, but he's down for a couple weeks. Chris Godwin, oh my god. Don't look up his injury, whatever you do. But yeah, in the fourth quarter, he went down. So what does this mean for fantasy football players, like owners, you know? Well, if we're looking at the Buccaneers, if you're a Baker Mayfield owner, you're taking a huge L from that. Like that event specifically. Like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, they're both wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. And if you look at the history of the Bucs so far this year, they take up it, like the Buccaneers run through both of them, okay? And so every other wide receiver there, literally, like, they don't exist. And so we also have McMillan. Is this his name, McMillan? I had to double check what his name was because I really had no idea who he was. But McMillan takes a huge W. So everybody that owned McMillan for whatever reason, these owners are taking a huge W because their stocks increased. You know, everybody wants a little piece of McMillan. Not really. Not really. They're not a Mike Evans or a Chris Godwin, but he is going to get the job as the lead wide receiver 1 for a couple weeks. So if you believe in Baker Mayfield and you believe that he's going to get McMillan there, then you want to draft a lot of McMillan in your waiver wire. So, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. What do you do in this instance, in the injuries? I'm sorry, I'm so bad at presenting, but I'm in a rush, okay? What do you do when injuries happen in fantasy football? Obviously, you trade, right? Now, I'm not saying you trade Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin is now a drop, okay? Chris Godwin, if you looked at that injury, which again, if you haven't, thank you. Don't do that to yourself. But Chris Godwin's a drop, right? If you own Mike Evans, you're going to put him in the IR. IR, by the way, is another thing. Injury reserve. If your players are injured, put them in the IR. It saves you a bench spot. It's great. But Mike Evans, people will try to trade for him, especially players that are in a good position. For the postseason, because like they're like, for example, they're in a 6-0 record right now, and they're kind of like, you know what, this kind of wraps. You know, I'm gonna give whatever I have for Mike Evans because later on, I could really use him. So you could trade with those kinds of managers if you want. Baker Mayfield, you could also trade him away, but to be honest, I don't want to give you recommendations for trading Baker because as a Mayfield fan, I still think he's going to do pretty good. And so, yeah, let's talk about a trade that I actually did, okay? Trading, this is an actual trade that I did back in like week 4, or something. I'm really bad at these dates, but I traded Anthony Richardson and JSN for Terry McLaurin. And so Anthony Richardson, okay, really hyped up quarterback, a lot of like clout, you know, because last year he, like, for the 2 or 3 weeks that he played, he was really good. And then the first 2 weeks, I think, or first week this year, amazing player. Oh my goodness. Unbelievable. If you're a Colts fan, jeez, you guys are having it all, you know. Anyways, he's bad now, okay? He's bad now. And I didn't believe in him. In fact, he got benched for Joe Flacco. He got hurt, actually. And he's back. He's back again. And so everybody that's in the Colts are suffering. But this was before Anthony Richardson was really bad. Like, he was bad, but is he consistently bad? Not sure. and I didn't want to find out, so I traded him away. And then I don't know if this guy is going to want AR like for Terry one-on-one. So to sweeten the deal, I threw in JSN. JSN, looking back, a little bit, you know, like I kind of still want to keep JSN around because he is a premium handcuff. Handcuff. He is a premium handcuff, meaning DK Metcalf, if he gets hurt, JSN's going to see a lot of volume. He's going to share it with Tyler Lockett, of course, but like JSN, he's already getting a little volume, and you already know that he's pretty like above average as a wide receiver. And so if DK Metcalf goes down, JSN is arguably a must start, like as a wide receiver too. But right now, at most, okay, he's like a flex spot at most. But if I own JSN, I'm benching him. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. And yeah, these two players were projected to go down, except for JSN. And I wanted someone shiny. I wanted a Lamborghini. I wanted Terry McLaurin, okay? And the reason, my argument for getting Terry was Jaden Daniels at the time was starting to show a little bit, okay? He's really showy, but is he consistently showy? Again, consistency is huge in fantasy football. And I believe that Jaden Daniels is the future, which is why whoever is catching the balls Jaden Daniels throws, I want to get that dude, okay? And so Terry McLaurin is my guy. And right now, actually, with trade season going on, I really hope Cooper Kupp doesn't go to the Commanders, or, you know, like, I think D-Hop and, yeah, okay, I think he's probably like, yeah. Cooper Kupp, just please don't go to the Commanders. I know the Commanders can make it happen. Just please no. I traded for Terry, and I'm really happy about it. Trade of the year. Anyways. Other than trades, Kevin, I'm happy with the guys that I drafted, and I don't want to make a bad decision. Well, in fantasy football, where's the fun if you don't trade, okay? But let's say that you just really don't feel comfortable trading. You don't want to mess up what I have right now. And I think my team has a lot of potential, and I have a lot of hope. Fair enough. Don't trade. Don't trade. Sure. Okay. I've won a couple of teams like that. But okay, what else can I do to amplify and enhance my team? Well, you can also do, I'm sorry. Oh man, I deleted the waiver. Okay, 1 second. All right, I have to cook this up real quick. But okay, waiver wires. Okay, yeah. If you don't want to trade, do the waiver wire. Like, take a look at your waiver wire every single week, because again, what I said earlier was, because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down, right? You want to see if McMillan is still in the waiver wire and grab him. I'm not saying he's a must start. I have really no idea, guys. But at the time of making this video, we still haven't seen what the Bucks are like without Chris Godwin and, you know, Mike Evans. So I'm just saying. I am just saying. Don't blame me. Hey, maybe this video will rot. Okay, it might rot like milk or age like wine. But you want to see if McMillan's in the waiver wire, and if he is, you want to grab him, right? Because oh my God, maybe I don't like McMillan. Maybe somebody else likes McMillan. At that point, you can trade away McMillan and be like, and not think too much about it, right? Because you just got McMillan, right? He's not a guy that you drafted. He's a guy that you just basically window shopped for, right? I consider waiver wires as window shopping or thrifting, because these are players that are not, you're not really looking at them, but they're starting to look really trendy. And with that in mind, you can buy it and flip it. Isn't fantasy football fun? So that's waiver wires for you. Now, let's go to the weekly matchups. As I said, you want to watch the games every week, right? So, different players, this goes without saying, right? Players do good against bad defenses, and players do bad and good defenses. That's not necessarily true, but it's still something to keep in mind, okay? So let's take a look at this, okay? Derrick Henry, RB2, right behind Saquon Barkley, going against the Browns this week. Oh my god. Dude, you have to start him, okay? If you put him on the bench, you're actually throwing, right? It's a must start. Must start. Derrick Henry against Kansas City Chiefs defense. Oof. I am not saying you bench him because that's still ridiculous. He's literally RB2, right? But all I'm saying is, the Kansas City Chiefs has probably the best rush defense, right? They're really good against, like, they really shut down Kamara. They shut down Derrick Henry week 1, right? I don't know who was playing here. Probably Chase Brown. I don't remember. Bijan Robinson got shut down. All right, let's take a look at that. Well, Bijan got a touchdown. That probably saved them. I'm not sure. You know, J.K. Dobbins, right? And then Alvin Kamara, Jordan Mason. The Chiefs are really good at shutting down RBs. And so if you have Derrick Henry going against the Kansas City Chiefs this week, you can't really rely on him for that, you know, that ceiling that you're trying to go for, because you don't know if he's going to make an explosive play. A lot of variables come into play here. But you're definitely not benching Derrick Henry, right? But if it comes to like certain guys, like, so if you have a guy that's like Xavier Worthy that has high upside, right? But he is going against a team that has that's just really good at the pass, you know, like they're really good at shutting down pass plays, then you're going to have to, I would bench him 100%. But if I have nobody else to start, right? But you don't feel confident in starting these kinds of players every week, which is why you have a bench, right? And that's why you have depth, right? You want to get the players that have good matchups. And that's kind of why I also watch Flock Fantasy every week, because he gives really good week-to-week updates, like tier lists on what players are must-starts, what players are considerations, what players are not that good. You want to pay attention to those kinds of channels, because that's what I would do, right? If you're looking at horse players and mediocre offenses going against a really, really good defense, then ooh. That's a debate, isn't it? Am I starting Chuba Hubbard against the Kansas City Chiefs? Ooh, I mean, that's a lot of hope. That's all I'm going to say. And this week, I'm pretty sure the Chiefs are going against the Raiders, so good luck, Zamir White. I'm like, whoever's a Zamir White owner, you know, good luck, bro. Good luck.